Look what the tide dragged in. Most people didn't go to the Absalom docks once the sun went down. The place was dangerous enough during daylight hours, but once the shadows grew long, the place didn't even pretend it didn't have teeth. Brawls spilled into the street often enough that half the wine shops and drinking dens didn't even bother with a door, and whispers begging for coins or promising fleshy pleasures undreamed of slid out of nearly every alley. Anyone foolish enough to step closer, though, would probably find nothing but a knife waiting for them in the dark. And if someone managed to make it back out of the alley, they'd find the harbor guard uninterested in helping, unless it was to help themselves to whatever the unfortunate victim had left. Viorek Almashi strode down the center of Low Street with the grace and confidence of a hunting cat. Long and lean, gold rings winked in the Parisian's ears, and a silver chain around his neck caught the light from the lamps. The scimitar with the well-worn grip that rode on his left hip discouraged those looking for easy prey, though, and any who got close enough to see the dueling scars on his cheeks, as well as the cold fire in his dark eyes, offered him little more than a nod as he strode on past. There was enough trouble to go around in the docks, after all, and nobody wanted more than their share if they thought they could avoid it. The Broken Oar was a disreputable place even by the district's standards. Pushed up a side street and found down half a flight of stairs, one could only find it by following the scent of sour wine and the particular odor of brine and sweat that marked a place that catered to the roughest sort of sailor. The interior was dim and smoky, with greasy candles casting a wan light on the crooked tables, and a few storm lamps hung from iron hooks near the ceiling beams. Most of the eyes that turned Viorek's way returned to their drinks, their dice cups, or their current companion. But one did not. Skell Dauger occupied the entirety of a bench meant to hold 2 men. A hulking Ulfin with a neck like a bull and shoulders hardened by years at the oar, his blonde hair was bound in a thick braid. His beard was likewise plaited, with beads of bone carved with runes clacking together whenever he shook his head. A black leather patch covered where his left eye had once been, and the scar that wormed its way from beneath the patch drew his lip up into a sneer on one side. Skell's mouth twitched, and mischief glimmered in his blue eyes as he watched Viorek approach. "I received your message," the Parisian said.
"So I gathered,"
Skell replied, taking a deep swig from a pitcher he was using like a mug. He gestured toward the other bench and wiped his mouth.
"This is not a place I would expect to find you otherwise."
Viorek sighed and shook his head. The Parisian seated himself carefully, throwing a casual glance over his shoulder to be sure no one was going to interrupt their privacy. "Why am I meeting you here?" Skell's smile vanished, but the gleam in his eye, if anything, got brighter. Without a word, he plucked something off the seat behind him and held it up. It was a small package, carefully wrapped in an oilskin. Viorek's breath caught in his throat, and he took the offered package in a hand that trembled slightly. Laying the package on the scarred tabletop, he tugged the bindings and unfolded it with care. Beneath the oilskin was a book, bound in rich, black leather. There was no title on the cover, just an imprint of a pair of fangs. Viorek looked up sharply. "You didn't," he said. Skell's grin was so broad Viorek barely noticed his scar.
"Open it,"
he said, taking another swig of his wine. Viorek carefully lifted the front cover. His eyes traced the title of the volume and then fell to the bottom of the page. There was a dedication there, followed by the intricate loops of a signature. Viorek's mouth dropped open. "You got her to sign it," he said. "Ailson Kindler herself." Before Skell could say anything, Viorek was on his feet. He was around the table in a step. One hand tangled in Skell's hair and the other grabbed him by his beard. The Parisian pulled him in for a hard kiss. Skell returned the gesture just as adamantly. Someone in the tap room whistled, and someone else laughed.
"You approve of my gift, I take it,"
Skell said. "You know I do," Viorek replied. He released Skell's braids, cupping his cheek, the one without a scar, where he could still feel properly.
"I wanted to make sure you had something to treasure in my absence,"
Skell said, putting one heavy, calloused hand on the back of Viorek's hand and squeezing gently. "You aren't absent now," Viorek said.
This is true.
Scale said.
Should we go upstairs and you can thank me more personally?
The sound of disgust Vioric made in the back of his throat was enough to make Skell laugh out loud. The Varisian glared at the big Ulfin. Tell me you weren't planning on staying in this hole the entire time you were in port.
What? I like this place.
Skell said, sweeping one arm to encompass the room.
The wine is affordable, the bed is comfortable, even the rats are more agreeable than the ones on my ship.
And the company? Vioric asked. Skell pursed his lips, as if pondering the question. Halfway across the room, a fight broke out over whether or not someone was cheating, and a stool smashed across their head.
The company does leave something to be desired, I will admit,
Skell said with a sigh. Come on then, Vioric said, carefully rewrapping his gift and sliding it into the satchel at his hip. And don't let anyone knife you on your way out. I have other plans for you tonight.